And this morning we're excited because we've heard such good things from you folks about the last interview that we had about parenting. So, I mean, we're just really excited about what these young people are going to tell us about marriage.
We're real experts here.
They know the theory. But we're not really going to try to tap into their experience in marriage. We're going to explore with them what they've been learning from their own parents and from others that can make a difference in their marriage. So, that's okay, right?
That's fine.
All right. So, why do you think that so many couples today seem to be struggling and unhappy in their marriages?
I was just the other morning, I read something that totally blew my mind. I'm reading through Adventist Home with my girlfriend right now in the United States, and I read this, which obviously I've read before, but it never hit me like it hit me the other day. And this is what it said. This is from Adventist Home, page 105, and it's talking about. Let me see if I got the right one here. Yeah, it's talking about new couples in particular coming together, and it says this: often they discern in each other unsuspected weaknesses and defects, but the hearts that love has united will discern excellencies also heretofore unknown. So there's this adjustment phase of learning to, finding out new things about each other, etc. But then she says two sentences later, this is what really blew my gasket. Often it is our own attitude, the atmosphere that surrounds ourselves, which determines what will be revealed to us in another. In other words, and to me that partially answers the question you just asked, why are so many unhappy? I wonder if so many couples aren't unhappy because, if I were the husband in a husband-wife relationship, I'm unhappy because my attitude is wrong, my thoughts are wrong, and because they are, the girl I'm married to can't do anything right. She can't, so that was both a little bit of a shock, but also a great encouragement, because it's like, no, you can choose your own destiny as, one half of a couple. You can decide what the temperature of your relationship is going to be. You're not at the mercy of the other person's whims or their selfishness or their whatever, which to me is a beautiful thing.
And before you speak, Hannah, this is very important because we run into this all the time, and we call it a self-fulfilling prophecy. When the attitude that's just been brought forward here is that my wife has this problem and that problem, and we went through this, so hopefully you'll never have to go through this, but you will be tempted to go through this, okay? But it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If all we see is the criticism and the fault-finding, they get worse and worse. And if it's happening on both sides, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that's very negative. But on the positive side, it can become a very happy self-fulfilling prophecy.
I think something else that is a big part is that so often couples focus on themselves and their own happiness. And this isn't just something in marriage, this is something that applies to a lot of relationships in life. And we focus on what the other person is or isn't giving us. So maybe we think that, well, they're not making me happy, and so, I can't be happy and we can't have a happy relationship because they're not doing this. But the reality is, if we think about focusing on our own actions and the way that we can make the other person happy, and take the focus off of ourselves, then I think that that's often where the happiness comes in. When we go into a relationship looking for all the ways this person is going to make us happy and make us feel loved, instead of thinking about what we can do to reach out to that person, then it instantly sets us out for being unhappy because the other person isn't going to be perfect. And I think this is something that, especially in our culture, is wrong in our mindset even before we go into marriage, because we think that once we get into marriage, this person is just going to make me happy for the rest of my life. And that's, they will, but only if we're committed to doing that as well, and not putting them in the place of God. God, because I think sometimes we can do that and think, well, once I'm married, then I'll always be happy, I'll always have someone there for me. But the reality is that we're going to be married to another human being, and they're not going to be perfect. And so we have to have that connection, that relationship with God, and that focus on the other person instead of focusing on what they're doing to make me happy. Focus on what we can do to improve the relationship.
Okay, I want to take this question in a little different direction. It's not on there, by the way.
That's good. I love spontaneity. So do they.
A lot of times we encounter couples who say, yeah, but we didn't get started right. We were either in the world, or we had a wrong intimate relationship before our marriage, or we hardly knew each other, or our relationship was long distance. And people fill in all kind of reasons at the beginning why we're having problems in the present. So do you have any thoughts on that? Is there something that stays with us from the beginning that can't be overcome? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I don't believe there's any such thing as a pre-existing fault that happened 20 years ago that now, well, we're just stuck. Sorry, we can't do anything about this. Nor do I believe there is such a thing as I do believe there is such a thing as marrying the wrong person, or planning to get married to the wrong person. Once you're married, I don't believe it's possible to be married to the wrong. I mean, that person has just become the right person.
That's right.
Well said.
And so there's, you may have some adjustment. You may have a lot of learning to do to adjust to differences in temperament and in personality and whatever. But to me, it goes back to that thoughts thing. I mean, our thoughts run away with us. And so much as I've been reading just the first few chapters of Adventist Home here. Again, you know what? Serious resource. Go read the first couple chapters of Adventist Home if you want the whole thing laid out. Just beautiful, but over and over again, she places the responsibility for not only our relationship with God, but our relationship with the other person on ourselves, on our thoughts. We're not at the mercy of circumstances. We're at the mercy of how truly we are willing to lay ourselves down, to be submitted to the will of God, and to say, you know what, I find myself in this situation now, we are going to make the best of it.
Amen. So I want to pick up on the Adventist Home, because if you will go, you hear the enthusiasm that Sean is expressing about reading Adventist Home because of where he is in life. Okay? I want to encourage all of us to go back and read Adventist Home, but read it sort of like we did last night in that quote. We spent the majority of the message on parenting last night with one reference, one paragraph. And there were 9 principles that needed to be taught, cultivated, and given. And if you will go back together, not individually, together, as husband and wife, wherever you are in your marriage, asking God to give you wisdom, to open your hearts to one another, and you read one paragraph and you pick out what it's saying to both of you, and you talk about it, and you pray about it, and you make commitments to God and one another about it, it will revolutionize your marriage.
Amen.
Can I third that opinion? Listen, this is just a tidbit. Yesterday, so we're on chapter 17 this morning, but yesterday, I actually wrote to Vanessa's my girlfriend, that I have this thought, that married couples should be reading chapter 16, which is a happy, successful partnership. The number of keys she gives there is like, you ought to be reading that once a week after you get married, at least 52 times a year, or until it is completely memorized from start to finish.
And lived out.
Exactly. It is so beautiful, so practical, and yet so deep.
Amen.
Yeah.
Good.
Do you want to add to that?
Okay. All right. How do you think you would communicate in the marriage? This is a new trademark.
You want to dive into this one first?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I love this selflessness here.
Hannah is so eager. She's so eager here for her expertise. There are 4 defining factors that I hope to carry, no, that I trust I would carry, I'm determined to carry into marriage communication. Those 4 factors are, they already exist in our courtship communication. The first one is positivity. By that I mean, I have quickly discovered that you have to communicate on positive things before you have a basis to communicate on difficult things. So, in other words, if the only time you ever have communication is because someone has a gripe with the other person, or there's some terrible issue to take care of, this is not, that is communication, it'll be a conversation, but you won't have a foundation for positive communication in the first place. So, number 1 is positivity. Number 2 would be integrity. You have to be willing to say what's comfortable and what's uncomfortable. You have to be willing to live in the open when you're in a relationship with someone, especially in a marriage relationship with someone. Things that are hidden become enemies. And so you have to, uncomfortable or not, we have to be willing to communicate in a way that's raw, especially as concerns ourselves. Revealing things or whatever that need to be revealed. So number 1 would be positivity, number 2 would be integrity, number 3 would be humility, which actually really
Cuts across self.
Yeah, and it actually enables the whole, humility and integrity really go hand in hand, because if I am communicating with humility, that makes it much easier for Vanessa to communicate with integrity. If every time she says something that is a little bit upsetting, then well, that obviously it's going to make it much more difficult to say that, and vice versa, same thing. So, humility, again, not a natural human trait, one that needs to be pursued. It is a gift from God, but one that God is very willing to give. But I feel it's completely indispensable. And the last one would be consistency. Meaning, this is not a matter of just, when we have problems or when we have time or when we, then we'll communicate. Communication is to a relationship like breathing is to life. You have to do it. In the case of breathing, you have to do it 12 times a minute or you'll start turning blue. In the case of communication, you have to do it on a daily basis. You have to do kinds of it on a daily basis, kinds of it maybe on a weekly basis, but you have to be consistent, otherwise it's not communication at all, it would just be, a talk.
Yeah, even though I'm not married, communication is something that I have a big burden for in my own relationship with my family and relationship with friendships. Communication is something that's really important to me. So it's probably the part of marriage that I have thought about the most because it's so important to me. And I think that one of the biggest things that I value and that I think should be in a marriage relationship is vulnerability. Because I think especially in our society, the whole concept of being completely open is unfortunately not there. And so often there is the whole concept of putting up masks and trying to be something that you're not and not really being real with the other person. And I think that when you're in a relationship as close as marriage, and even in the family and in friendships, it's so important to be really real with the other person and to really tell them what's going on in your mind, even if that isn't comfortable, even if that may be awkward, or it may mean telling the other person something that they're not going to want to hear, or maybe revealing something about yourself that is uncomfortable. But I think that that is so important because there can't be real closeness in a relationship if there isn't real honesty before that, because those two things are very connected. So I think that one of the biggest things is being willing to be open, being willing to be vulnerable. And I think in a marriage relationship, not that I know this from experience, but I think that there should be nothing that a husband and wife can't talk about. If there's secrets and if there's things that aren't being shared, there's something wrong in the relationship and it needs to be completely open so that anything can be talked about. I think something else that's very important is to keep an attitude of kindness in communication, because I think sometimes in family relationships we can think, well, they're my family and I know they love me, so I'll just say whatever I want to say, however I want to say it. And there's a difference between raw honesty and just saying a bunch of stuff that we feel like is completely unnecessary to say. Raw honesty doesn't mean we just say, everything we feel.
Amen.
It means that we say everything in a kind attitude, in the attitude of Christ. So coming to the other person and saying, I don't like this about you, and this, that is lacking kindness. And I think that kindness is very important to keep that attitude in the relationship. Otherwise, not only will it destroy an opportunity for vulnerability, but it destroys the relationship itself. Because if you're going to speak unkindly and in an unchristlike manner to the other person is not then going to want to come to you and be vulnerable because you've just blown their opportunity for that. I think another thing that's important is to recognize in your communication that even when things don't necessarily go right in the communication, that the relationship is something that is forever, and that maybe temporary little lack of communication is not a reason to then stop communicating in the future. So if communication doesn't necessarily go right in an instance, that is not then a reason to withdraw and pull back. It's a reason to sit down, talk the whole thing through, and to actually go deeper in communication than you would have before because of the issue, instead of pulling back because of the issue.
Well, I wish they would have been around before we got married. That didn't work that way, but anyway. But I do have a question, particularly for Sean, on this area of communication, because it happened to us, and I would say it probably happens to 99 couples out of 100. The men before marriage are great communicators. But when they say these two words, I do, it's the end of the conversation. So,
It's like the final amen.
so we're going to check up on him.
We'll bring them back on the stage here in a few years to have a follow-up interview, and it will be all spontaneous.
With his bride by his side.
That's right.
So, I know you're not crossed that bridge yet.
Yeah.
But I think you're heading that direction, clearly.
Yeah.
So, is that going to happen to you? Oh, no, I should say, is that going to happen to Vanessa?
I tell you, from a human standpoint, it's entirely possible that could happen. From just speaking of personalities and the realities of, I think men are really oftentimes on a different wavelength. And of course, we have the whole, you have to go to work, you have to make money, you have to go. And so we start to, I think that we start to view our life, maybe it is like compartment syndrome. We start to view our life as, several different things, and they're, and when we're pursuing one priority, like putting food on the table, then all the other things just really have to take the back seat. I think that's unfortunate. I think that women are much better at identifying from the start that everything is interconnected. I pray on a daily basis that I will be able to see those connections. And I'm committed, by God's grace, not to be like, oh, we made it. She said yes, and now, and in fact, even as I can tell you from experience that the experience that we're going through now, this experience of courtship, the experience of deepening friendship, the experience of seeking God together, reading Adventist Home together and sharing thoughts back and forth. That experience alone has uncovered a depth of friendship and connection that I didn't even, in my mind, I thought, oh yeah, no, courtship is going to be really fun and marriage is fun and all this kind of stuff. But I can tell you, I had no idea just how beautiful God becomes, when you see him through this lens. So that fact alone has made me triply more desirous of maintaining, maintaining this trajectory even post-marriage if God continues to lead that way. And we've already begun to have discussions, like for example, last time I was with her a couple of weeks ago, we started making a mental list of the ingredients for a strong and happy marriage based upon what we're learning now, including daily talk time and, just a whole long list, everything from having a baby stroller to, reading something, not your whole devotions, but reading something together, even in the long. We got to the end of this, or our sharing one day over what we had read in devotions, which is partially this Adventist home thing. And I suddenly had the thought, oh yeah, well this is something that a lot of people in courtship do, and it's so nice and so fun. How many married couples do you know that spend a part of their study time every morning reading the same thing, and then coming together and sharing? I was like, I don't want to lose that.
Amen.
I don't want to lose that. So yeah, by God's grace, it's not going to happen to me because we're already putting in place, we're already making lists in our head, lists on paper of things that we definitely want to continue if God keeps leading in that direction into the married life. You know, factors that are very common in courtship but not so common in marriage. Yeah, to keep the fire alive.
That's good. Well, we'll check in with Vanessa.
Okay, can I say something?
Okay.
So, did you just hear what Sean said? We are already putting in place. So, do you have your paper and pencil out? Are you putting in place, while these young people are talking, what you're going to do from here on out? Married couples. One of the worst things that we experience as many of us are long-time Adventists, is that we hear these things and we say, oh, isn't that sweet? Isn't that what love is all about? Just listen to him, okay? And it just goes right over our heads. And I just want to take this opportunity to emphasize your marriage will not change for the better unless you start doing that.
Amen.
It will decline because we don't stay like this. We are either going up or we are going down. And it is our choices daily to come together, take a little portion and read it and talk about it and pray about it. It will make a huge difference in your lives.
Amen.
Okay, we'll start with Han on this one.
All right.
Since you've never been married, and since you're not even in a relationship, and this question is actually for both of you, but share with us, as a young person, you've lived in your home for 19 plus years, you know your mom and dad pretty well by now. Share with us at least one or two of the highest elements or gifts or examples they've been to you as a husband and wife that you have been blessed by and want to carry into your marriage.
Well, there's a couple things that come to mind, and that is that my parents have always been really good at expressing visible love to each other. And I think that sometimes couples may be a little nervous of being affectionate to each other in front of their children. But, you know, I think that's really important because it shows the children that the parents really do care about each other. It's like openly on display that, you know, our parents love each other. They do fun things together. They, you know, and even though my brother and I would give them a hard time about it, you know, when we're doing something and they're kissing, we're like, oh, there go the parents again, you know, and it's kind of like a joke within the family. But at the same time, I think it's a very positive thing because I think that when children can see that their parents are visibly in love and enjoying each other's company, that gives the children a sense of security instead of thinking, okay, so are mom and dad together today? Or, you know, unfortunately, I think that's how it is with a lot of young people. So I think that it's very important to show that affection and that love between each other as husband and wife in front of your children. Now, of course, it has to be real. Don't go out there trying to make it look like you love each other if that's not really the way it is. But ask God to give you that love and then let that be on display in front of your children so that they can see that. Another thing is that my parents make a point to have fun together. Instead of just, you know, working and doing all these different projects, they have fun, and we can see them doing that. We can see them just enjoying each other's company, you know, giving each other a hard time, laughing together. And I think that that is also healthy for children because especially little children, they like to do things that are fun. And if parents are always, you know, just serious and, you know, with each other all the time, that doesn't give the children a very good visual of what marriage should look like. Children should be able to see that marriage is happy, it's fun, it's enjoyable. And so I think that it's a very positive thing as parents to have that fun relationship with your spouse and have fun with your spouse in front of your children so that they can see this is what a healthy Christian marriage should look like.
Can you give an idea of what they do to have fun? They're not here to protect themselves.
This is the uncensored version.
Well, I know there's lots of different little things that they do. Maybe it will be, giving each other a hard time about what they're doing on their devices or whatever. So, or I'm trying to think of it.
Like your dad calling your mom the Facebook queen?
Yeah, even though she doesn't look at Facebook for every 2 weeks or whatever, they'll give each other a hard time. They'll have fun in the kitchen together. Maybe Dad will be doing the dishes, and he's the one who does the dishes in our house because he decided he didn't want to have a dishwasher, which he actually changed his mind about last week. So we're all praising the Lord. But anyway, he was like, "No, we don't want a dishwasher, so I'll do all the dishes." So of course that kind of creates a family fun element because it can be 4 o'clock in the afternoon and the dishes haven't been done. So we're like, hey, Daddy, you do the dishes. So just little things like that where they'll, bounce fun ideas off of each other or laugh about things instead of, getting frustrated, like, why haven't you done the dishes? It can become a fun thing, where they're doing it together or doing work projects together. And it's not necessarily anything big and planned. It's just the little things that you can see them laughing together or, working on projects and having fun. Not necessarily planning things out, but just the natural dynamic of when there's love in the marriage that shows through.
Okay, Sean's turn.
So when I think of my parents and try to distill the single largest gift that their relationship has been to me, to us, I think it's the combination of actually 2 things, one of which is their natural diversity of perspective, because my mom and dad are very different. My dad is more calm, cool, collected, logical thinker, left-brained. My mom is more emotional, passionate, creative, right-brained. Their differences don't stop there. Of course, they have many commonalities as well. But they're very different people, and so they brought totally different dynamics into the family circle, and of course they brought totally different dynamics into their marriage relationship as well. But those things, coupled with the fact that they had unity of vision. So diversity of perspective, diversity of perspective but unity of vision, the combination of those 2 things is a really compelling argument in favor of the God they serve and the principles they live for, because it teaches us a number of things. Number 1, that you don't have to completely agree on absolutely everything in order to get along with somebody. Because you're not going to completely agree or totally, get with any other one. There is no other person exactly like you in the world. So that perspective alone has taught us then, the kids, and there's 4 of us, and we have very different personalities and perspectives and opinions and likes and dislikes among ourselves. But we're extremely close. In fact, I've never encountered siblings closer, and I think part of the reason is because our differences have never been a barrier to our closeness, and that's partially thanks to my parents. Another thing that's taught us is obviously how it is that the love of God operates in 2 people like that when they've chosen that, we see the world differently on certain things, and we're looking at sometimes opposite sides of the coin, but that actually, it's made them both stronger. Because, mother helps father to see from her perspective, father helps mother to see from their perspective, and the 2 of them are stronger than the sum of their parts. So to me, again, it's been a beautiful thing to see, a beautiful foundation for our home, beautiful example for young people growing up, and of course, a beautiful example as we look towards. Both of my sisters are married. Both my brother and I are in relationships. Beautiful example as we look towards setting up homes of our own, having relationships of our own, how that all works, and how we can, through the sanctified exercise of our own gifts and the sanctified presentation of our own perspectives, we can potentially make someone else stronger as well.
Okay, did you say there was a second thing?
That was the 2. So one is just,
right.
our internal, those 2 things put together.
All right, switching gears now to conflict. Conflict is inevitable because we live in the great controversy. And we won't always be as surrendered as we should be on those off days. How do you think conflict will be dealt with in your new homes as God provides them?
Do you want to go?
Sure.
She's further away from it. She's more talking.
Something that I think is really important once, there is conflict in a relationship, so often it's really easy in that conflict to start focusing on all the negative things in the relationship. So, this person does this that I don't like, and they do this that I don't like, and before we know it, we've kind of created them into a monster in our minds. So this isn't just in a marriage relationship. We do this with our families when they say something that crosses our will, or maybe we're even tempted to do it with our friends. But I think that when we are willing to, in the heat of that moment, when there's a disagreement, or maybe even there wasn't any words spoken, but we know that, things aren't right, then we have the opportunity to start thinking about all the things we love about that person. And I think that that is well and truly possible, even if it isn't necessarily what we feel like doing in that moment. But if we can start to think about, I love this about this person, and I love this, and it might take you a little while to think of something in the moment, but persevere and do it. And start thinking about the things that you love about them and the fact that the relationship is forever. It's not just, a conflict may arise, but a marriage relationship is forever, conflict or no conflict. And so if you start to think about those things that you love about that person and that you appreciate about them, then it really helps to put everything into perspective so that the argument doesn't become so huge that it blocks out everything else in the relationship. Because in reality, the argument isn't so big that it cancels out everything that you love in that person. It just can sometimes feel that way in our minds. Another thing that I think is important is to take time to pray before you say everything that's on your mind in the conflict. And that sounds really cliche because we've all heard, you pray when you're in an argument. But it really does work. And take the time to go away for 5 minutes if you need to, maybe an hour, and take that time to say, okay, God, what is it you want me to do? How do you want me to interact with this person in this disagreement? How do you want me to, deal with them? But at the same time, don't let that taking time to pray be a cop-out of, fixing the disagreement. I think that there's nothing more dangerous than letting disagreements go and never resolving them, because that puts up a wall between you and that other person. So if there's been a disagreement and it's easier to just not talk about it, just pretend it never happened, just move on, that's very dangerous. So be willing to resolve that conflict, even if you can't do it in the moment because the heat of the moment is too intense to try and figure it out. Don't leave it. Don't leave that conflict unresolved. Go back and visit it again and say, okay, what can we do different next time? Let's make sure there's nothing between us before we move on, because there's nothing like having that little nagging in the back of your brain that everything isn't quite right. There should be an openness in the communication. If there is something that isn't quite right, you can sit down and talk it through and then move on, knowing that there's nothing between you. Otherwise, it builds a wall.
Okay, I just thought of something in response to what you said and of an experience that we had. Oftentimes, my husband says to me, honey, you're wonderful, you're wonderful. And that's when he's feeling in love with me, right? But then there's those times when there is tension. They pop up at unexpected times over the littlest thing. And I remember one day saying to my husband, the next time we start down the track of conflict and we're heading downhill, I'm going to tell you how wonderful I am. Well, I said it off the cuff. It was one of those, it was in fun, like Hannah was saying, in fun. So sure enough, it was sometime after that, I don't know, weeks or months later, and we started in on, I don't know what started it, but I just know we were starting this position. And all of a sudden, my words popped back in my head, and I said, honey, don't you remember I'm wonderful? And that was, it just totally melted the whole conflict.
I'll tell you, it so threw me off from my train of thought. Because I was on track. And when she said that, I had to agree, at least internally, that I did say that. Well, that threw me off. So I lost that train of thought, and then the Holy Spirit got access to me, and I said, baby, you are wonderful. And I forgot all about whatever it was that I was on track with. So that's just a positive example for that.
So now we don't remember the issue, but this is a highlight. This is something, one of those little treasures in our marriage that we recall, and it brings back positive memories. So I really appreciate you sharing that fact,
Yeah. I also was resonating with something she said there. Again, harking back to Adventist Home. I'm obsessed with Adventist Home right now. So sorry, guys, but I'm obsessed with Adventist Home right now. The thought of thinking, I mean, it goes back to that whole thoughts thing. What we do in our mind really deeply affects ourselves and then by extension our relationships. If we would spend more time thinking thoughts of gratitude and thanksgiving over the gift of God to us through this person, I feel like we would have both way less time to have idle thoughts to the contrary, and also we would have less mind to. It wouldn't even cross our minds. A couple of things come to mind. Number one is that I don't want to keep stepping back from the question, but sometimes it's good to. It seems as though you look across the landscape of courtship or dating relationships, whatever you want to call it, versus marriage relationships, and it seems as though there's way more conflict in a marriage relationship than in a dating relationship or in a courtship relationship. I wonder if that isn't. Well, of course, part of that is very understandable. In a marriage relationship, you're actually together. You're discovering all kinds of things that you had no way to discover before. But I wonder if that isn't also fruit of the fact that there's this phenomenon we were talking about. In dating and courtship, you're communicating constantly. You love to invest in that, and then marriage all of a sudden is kind of default. Oh, well, we're together now. So it seems to me that the most significant weapon we have against conflict is communication before conflict starts.
Amen.
If we have a foundation of good communication, if we have a relationship that's built on a mutual understanding and an effective exchange of information, when it comes down to a pinch point, suddenly it doesn't have to be a crisis, and we have the relationship to back up, working through that in a positive way. So to me, the best weapon we have against conflict is communication beforehand. But of course, still there will come those times where we find ourselves in conflict in the moment, and then those key elements become all important. The commitment to humility, the commitment to not attacking, to speaking with kindness, the commitment to gratitude, like I was saying before. But also there's this idea of stepping back, and the Mike makes reference to, and I think you've spoken of it before, my parents have spoken of it before. The idea of, in the heat of the moment, if things continue to escalate, instead of just barging through and still trying to fix it, of taking a moment apart to really make sure that both hearts are surrendered, that God is the Lord on the throne in my heart, before then revisiting the conversation. And I feel like that can be a very important step to take under certain circumstances. Stepping apart from the heat of the situation until hearts are settled, until we're fully surrendered, and then coming back and addressing the issue again. I think there's a balance there, because it can all, I've seen it or heard of it also used almost as a cop-out, like one person really wants to communicate and the other person is just really irritated, and they're just like, no, you're irritated right now, we're not going to talk about this right now, we're going to go pray and we'll do this later, or whatever. So it shouldn't be used as an excuse. It shouldn't be used as a kind of a wild card by the overbearing one to be like, no, I don't want to talk about this right now, therefore we're not going to talk about this right now. There are times when even in the midst of conflict, you just need to persevere. You need to pause for one moment, ask God to subdue the passion, pray together, asking God to subdue passion and bring clarity to your communication, and then persevere softly and tenderly, one step at a time, until you've gotten through to the far side. So yeah, a couple of things there. Obviously, stepping away and first having a pre-existing culture of communication in the relationship. That's a huge weapon of war against conflict. And then in the conflict, sometimes stepping away, or other times, particularly if it's one party or the other, just really seeking God together for the same peace to come into the situation, so that you can persevere through the communication and come to a satisfactory end.
Well, what do you think? Pretty good counsel? Adventist Home was brought up several times because You may be obsessed with it. That's a good obsession right now, especially if it lands very deeply and practically.
Yeah, amen.
But we probably should be a little bit more inclined towards it ourselves, right? Right?
Amen.
And those are choices that we can make. One of the hard things that happens, and this goes along with what both the young people said, we came to a recognition in our first year of marriage, which we went through some horrendous things as far as our communication or lack thereof. And we made a breakthrough by something very important. We said, we are not enemies. We are treating each other like enemies. We are allies against an enemy that wants to destroy us. Let's remember that. And God has honored that prayer.
Amen.
And when things go wrong and we don't stop to pause and pray, the right thing to do, and we push forward through it, the Holy Spirit somehow, because we both want it, desire it, pray for it, and need it, breaks that thought through to us that you are allies, not enemies. And that's beautiful. It's powerful, and it's a picture. We're both very visual people. And it is a good picture. I suddenly am with her. I see myself with her, not against her, in the picture of my mind. And it instantly calls to my heart, and almost all the time, I surrender to that picture, to the Lord. And it makes all the difference in the world. So maybe that will, some of these things will lodge in our minds. But
I have one more question.
One more, okay.
We have time for one more question, I think. This isn't on the paper either.
Yes, we're doing good. 41 minutes. I'm glad you have that up here.
A lot of couples struggle. One of the major conflicts outside of communication is the number one, divide and conquer. The second one is finances. Issues over how to spend the money or how not to spend the money. Because again, whoever you marry isn't going to be identical to you. So how do you see yourself dealing with conflict over financial issues?
I think one thing that is important, because there are so many different personality traits over how to deal with money. I know my own parents, they wouldn't mind me saying, have extremely different personalities when it comes to money and spending money. And yet at the same time, it's not about our personalities that determines how we spend our money. It's God's principles. And so I think that it's really important to study those principles together as a husband and wife and lay down, before you go into the specifics of how are we going to manage our money, lay down the principles of how we should manage our money as God's children. So lay down those principles first, agree on those principles, and then start looking at the specifics and see how the specifics fit into those principles that you've already agreed upon. Because if you go straight into the specifics, there's going to be disagreements. Well, I think I should have that money for this. No, I think, there's going to be those disagreements. But if you've gone through and you've laid out, this is what we want to do, these are the principles that we want to stick to in our home, and then you can fit in those, the different specifics. And sure, there's still going to be disagreements. There always is, but it goes back to how we choose to deal with those in our thoughts, how we choose to communicate about those, and communicating even about finances with kindness. And going into that, not like I'm talking about Alane said, not against each other, but for each other. This is, your home. It's both of your homes, and so let's treat it as if it's not, this is my money and this is your money. It's our money, and it's something that we do together.
Yeah, amen. I would agree with that, especially the last thing you said. When you're a family, you may have various income streams in your home. You may, heaven forbid, have two people working. You may have just one person working, but the other person owns rental property, so they have rental income. You may have, there's all kinds of scenarios, but I think one thing that is important is to step back and have this global picture. These are the principles that we desire to live by. And obviously, if you're in a relationship, these are things to discuss before you actually say "I do," because you don't want to end up finding out that you have someone with totally different global principles. But once you've identified those, then it's like, the money that comes in, be it from whatever direction, is part of that. There's a master plan. It all comes into that master plan. Now, when it comes to specifics, if you already have unity and agreement on the big picture, this is what we believe, this is what we're trying to accomplish, this is how much we want to put towards debt freedom, et cetera, then you can make adjustments for personalities within the husband and wife relationship. I know, like my parents, my dad does all the earning, almost all the earning. My mother does have some stuff with her dad, some real estate and stuff, but my dad does all the earning, but he only does certain parts of the finances, the actual nitty-gritty management. Certain parts he's handed over entirely to my mother because she prefers to do them a certain way. He doesn't mind her doing them that certain way. It causes, there's no stress, there's no conflict, there was in the early years when they were trying to, figure out money. It was like, it's okay, you can, we have our big picture, you do this part, I do this part, I pay the taxes, you pay the tithe, whatever. They've split out the responsibilities in such a way that there's still communication back and forth, but they can work somewhat independently without constantly having to micromanage each other. So there's no stress, there's no strain, and it works. It works for our family system and it works for their personalities. So I would say pursue creative options when it comes to the nitty-gritty management of money that's optimized for your family setup, for your various income streams, for your, whatever. There is no one way, it needs to be this way, and if it's not this way, it's not right. Well, the right way is a way that brings harmony and unity and that obviously respects the global principles like Hannah was talking about.
There's a quick question that might be coming up in family panel, but it may end up in the breakout. What about separate accounts in marriage?
Separate accounts. Yeah, that's a...
Meaning that,
yeah.
that this is your money, this is my money, and you don't bug me about your money.
Yeah. We have I can just tell you my family situation. We have several accounts. Some of which are all family accounts, some of which are, the kids obviously have their own accounts, and my mother also, who manages my grandfather's estate, has other accounts that have to do with that. We don't view them as separate piles, don't touch my, if someone needs something, for a given month or whatever, we don't view them as, well, this is mine, that's yours. I mean, it is mine, it has my name on it, I earned it or whatever, but we're a family, we're together. So in that context, it's our net worth. I would say, from that perspective, I shy away from the idea of, no, that's mine, don't touch it, just because I don't see in that really the spirit of Christ. I suppose if it wasn't coming from a selfish, if it was a sheerly logistical, whatever, it just makes more sense to have them separate for tax reasons or for whatever reasons. I suppose that could be a favorable situation, provided it fit into the whole picture, provided there was agreement, provided there was unity, provided it's not enabling selfishness. So I'm not going to stand here and say, no separate accounts, only joint accounts, only, again, that's a specific that's not even mine to say, but I think that really the issue where the conflict comes in with the separate accounts is the spirit that often comes along with separate accounts. It's not the fault of having two different account numbers. It's the fault of having two different perspectives and being like, I want to do this with my money, which is different than you want to do, but it's none of your business because it's not your money. Regardless of the dollar figure, that's going to put even if it was $2, it's going to build a wall in marriage, which we don't want to have it.
Going back to the whole Adventist home thing, I know there is a quote in Adventist home that talks about the husband giving the wife some money as personal allowance, because that was something that was a big thing for my parents, especially when they first got married. And I think that it is healthy to have, so in our family, the way that it works is that dad has a little bit of money that he saves as a personal allowance, and mother has a little bit of money that she saves. So that doesn't mean that if dad really needed some money for something, that mother wouldn't be willing to give that money. In fact, most of the time she spends her allowance buying him gifts because she loves gifts, and so that's what she does with her money. But at the same time, while it's very important to keep that, it's the spirit of us instead of my money and your money, it's our money. But at the same time, I don't think that means, the husband doesn't have to be looking at every receipt so that the wife spends, oh, you bought Kleenex today, okay, no, that was too much, and you bought that, this store you should have bought it here because it was cheaper there. That's going to create a lot of controversy. So while the general spirit is, a spirit of us and our money, don't micromanage each other, because that's going to create a huge amount of conflict that isn't necessary. Like Sean was saying, my parents have split out the dealing with the money. So mother deals with the money of the food, father deals with the money of like the car maintenance and all that kind of thing. And while it's not like it's her money and his money, they don't necessarily do every last little aspect together, because that just creates opportunity for conflict where it doesn't need to be. But the general spirit should be our money, not my money.
Amen.
All right, well, thank you, young people, for your good insights. God said back at the very beginning, when Adam looked around and there was nobody like Adam as he was naming the animals, and God said, "It is not good for man to be alone." And I still believe it today. It is not good for man to be alone, so God made man a helpmeet. And that has not changed today, although the marriage is under attack. So today, look at how good God says marriage is. It's one of two institutions that He made from the very beginning, the Sabbath and marriage. Let's not let the devil have access to our marriages anymore.
Amen.
To ravage them, okay? To destroy them. Let's put our hearts and our hands together and move forward in marriage, that we can have a marriage that represents the union of Christ to His people. Isn't that beautiful? It's our privilege. And it's really our duty. But the good side is the privilege. So do you want that kind of marriage?
Amen.
And then we'll check back in with these young people when, as time progresses and they have their marriage, maybe they'll join us back on stage for another interview. Wouldn't that be great?
2.0.
Okay. All right, Sean, you want to close us in prayer?
Sure. Bow your heads and kneel with us as far as possible. Holy Father, how good you are, how kind, how gracious, how full of mercy you are to offer us this gift, so representative of you yourself, this beautiful gift of marriage. I just ask that for each and every married couple in this room, that you would infuse these marriages with your Spirit, with love and joy and peace, with new life.
Amen.
So that in each home, each marriage can be the marriage itself, the marriage relation can bring both adults closer to each other and obviously give them a better and more beautiful picture of who you are. And it can do the same thing for all the children looking on. And so I pray for each marriage, but I also pray for each young person here not yet in a marriage, that we would be even now preparing by adopting these principles into our own life so we can be qualified to take part in this incredible and beautiful institution, this incredible and beautiful way in which you are seeking to communicate yourself, your character, to the rest of the world. We know that marriage is under attack. We know that family is under attack. We know that we, ourselves, Christians, they're under attack. So we just ask that you would put a hedge around us and help us to choose the right, that you may be able to accomplish all that you dream in us. In Jesus' name, amen.